I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Arakdev Bazak, Vice President, is a leader in the Business Process Services team and assists clients on topics related to an entire HR and talent services value chain, including permanent and cognizant talent acquisition, payroll, benefits, learning, border talent management, and multi-process HR outsourcing. Michael Jensen, Chief Research Officer, guides the practices of research agenda and architecture by leveraging his extensive experience to identify and unlock emerging trends. And Anil Vajian, Vice President, is a leader in the Business Process Services and the Service Optimization Technologies teams. Anil's responsibilities include leading Everest Group's HR outsourcing, contingent workforce management, managed service provider, and service optimization technologies offerings. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Michael.
Hello, everybody. Today's topic around HR outsourcing and the talent wars is a red hot topic with our clients. It's something that we are hearing about on a daily basis. It's a multi-dimensional, it's a complex topic. Talent and getting access to key talent has been something that's been, I've seen that in my entire career, but this is a bit different here. Getting availability, we're starting to see attrition, which once you started getting attrition, you get more attrition as people look at it and say, hey, maybe I should go look. We're starting to see inflationary expectations, both in salaries as well as in rates themselves in the industry. And again, complex problem, no easy answers. It's multidimensional. And today what we're going to do is we're going to walk you through some of those things that we're seeing out there in real time and some of our best suggestions on how to mitigate the overall talent war. So with that, let's get a perspective from how you're seeing this. What are the participants in this webinar? How do they think the talent gap has changed from pre-pandemic to 2021? So we want to get your perspectives and encourage you to give us your input. Okay, we've got a few answers now. Let's go ahead and everybody jump in right away. Okay, almost half of you guys have answered, not quite. Give another 5 seconds there. Okay, let's close it down and we'll show you the results here. Significantly worse was the demand is significantly outstripping talent availability. Kind of what we were expecting. There's a couple organizations down there that are seeing that talent has significantly improved, so they got a lot more talent than they have it versus demand. But overall, we'd say what 75% Arco are looking on the talent as a bigger challenge.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. Not surprising results at all. I would say the 20% who are slightly better are among the lucky organizations today. Because we see this across the board, right? Not just for high-end or highly skilled talent, but even for entry-level roles. Now, the talent demand-supply gap is probably the worst we have ever seen, and definitely that is being combined with the highest level of job openings ever seen in the market, right? So together, both of those are causing the problem. And one interesting byproduct of that is, today, there are not enough recruiters to hire all these people. So recruiters is another job that is in demand. And to go further, sort of from that, there are not enough recruiters to hire recruiters out there. So
yeah, I heard that same story from one of the service providers here. I can't hire recruiters fast enough to hire recruiters so they can recruit people. It was a chain of events that we're talking about here. I love it, love it. All right, well, let's move on to our agenda here. What we're going to do is we're going to give you some of those trends. We just got a little starting data point here from everybody on this webinar. We're going to talk about those trends, then we're going to talk about the impact on people strategies, and then we're going to talk about the role of outsourcing and how it can have a mitigating impact or help mitigate the impact of what we're talking about today. So with that, why don't we get started here? And Anil, why don't you talk us through some of those top level trends that you're seeing?
Right. So let's look at what's happening in the world of talent today. If we can move to the next page, yeah. All right. So the first trend here is on how employee expectations are changing. Now there are multiple generations of employees now. Add to that the whole contingent workforce equation. And you have various groups of employees that have different worldviews, so to speak. So several generations of the workforce now are also in the born digital category. So they have come to expect a certain level of experience as a consumer due to the Uberization of everything on the consumer side. And those expectations are rapidly carrying over into the workplace as well. Employee experience is also becoming more and more important in light of the ongoing talent war. And we've seen from your own experiences that this is very much a reality. So organizations need to do their best to attract and retain talent. So which also kind of covers the second trend that we have there, which is the talent supply demand gap, particularly post. I don't want to say post COVID, but since we have gotten into 2021, the demand supply gap is worsening, and this is happening across roles, right? Both at the entry level and also for more specialized, higher skilled roles. Third, the work from home construct is here to stay. Now, there are different perspectives to this argument. Some believe that we'll all go back to work in an office-centric manner as soon as we have some semblance of normality. And this is, of course, happening to some extent in certain geographies of the world. There are others that believe that we'll end up with a majority of the work actually done from home. Very likely we'll end up somewhere in between. But certainly we'll have more work from home situations than in the pre-pandemic era. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is another one. It's a top priority and has been for a few years now, and it will continue to be a priority. We are seeing not just more regulatory and reporting pressures around DE&I, but also proactive action from various enterprises, given it's a socially conscious and the right thing to do. So there's quite a bit of focus on DE&I initiatives, not just from an entry level intake perspective, but even at a boardroom level. So essentially, it's across the organization. Next, we have the contingent workforce. It's also becoming a key avenue for talent, and organizations are looking to tap into that skill set. So HR's remit is expanding in that direction as well, with key questions around sourcing, engagement, talent management, etc. for that segment. And this is increasingly coming under the purview of HR. So this is a little bit of a shift from the traditional management of contingent workforce under the procurement umbrella. But we are seeing that shift towards HR as we speak. Next slide, please.
All right, so let's look at the macro view of what we're seeing in the marketplace. So I always like to get a bird's eye view of the trends and the numbers here. So what we've done here is we've mapped out, this is US employment. We've mapped out the jobs and job openings versus the unemployed. So look at the orange line as being the unemployed numbers in the US, and then look at the blue line as the number of job openings. So a couple key points on the chart here. You see that we got just over right around 15 million jobs that were unemployed in 2008 with the financial crisis. That dipped down to almost 6 million, less than 6 million right before the pandemic. And then we lost 16 million jobs here in the US in 1 month. Okay. Now I've looked at some numbers in Europe, and because of the way they handle their employment laws, the numbers are not so nearly dramatic here. But when we did the close down, we closed down hard, and we laid off people, and we exited many people from being the employed to the unemployed very quickly. Now what you see here on the 2021 numbers, and you roll it forward to July, what you're going to see is the number of unemployed and the job openings is nearly equal. And so what we saw is actually a huge rise in job openings. In fact, 1.6 million higher than any number in the past, any pre-COVID COVID highs that we've seen, since the numbers have been collected. So what this is manifesting itself is a tremendous pressure on the supply-demand equation, as we were talking about. If we move to the next slide, where this is coming out and showing up in the real world is while we still have a $7.25 minimum wage on the federal level, the de facto wage now really has become, minimum wage has become $15 or more. I've seen signs that $15 is not enough to get the talent. You're starting to see, I mean, you can see that in the Costco, Amazon, Walmart salaries going 15 to 20. You're starting to see this not just a minimum wage issue though. Okay, so this is actually, we were looking at the global banking starting salaries moving from 75,000 per year to 100,000 per year. So that's a 25 to 35% raise depending on the company. We see this in these numbers here in new graduate expectations, 7%, and that was actually calculated at the very beginning of the year, so it doesn't reflect the post-pandemic openings. We talked about the JOLTS number there on the previous page. I can pick on different other aspects here. Accenture, India granting multiple increments of raises, bonuses, promotions, etc. BlackRock across the board, 8% raises, so not just just minimum wage. Not on this page here, but I believe that B of A actually announced a $25 minimum wage at their company. And then, kind of looking at the emphasis here. We do believe this phenomena is being led by the US. The reopening is probably 3, 4, 5, 6 months ahead, depending on the geography. And so it's too soon to call this as a truly global trend. And there's lots of factors that may mitigate this. But right now, we've got probably a sea change that I've never seen in my 35-year history, career history. So with that, let's move to the enterprise and ARCO. Let's talk about where you see the concerns.
Yeah, thanks, Michael and Anil, for the great context. So if we get down to the brass tacks, what are those issues which are keeping HR leaders and business leaders awake at night, right, in terms of talent? So the number one, from all of the data that we have seen is clearly the shortage of next generation skills. In fact, shortage of probably all skills out there. And all the remaining issues sort of seem to flow from there, right? So shortage of skills is combined with talent retention and market competition, because your competitors, your peers are trying to take talent away from you. So that becomes a big issue. And in terms of trying to manage that, you need to have a much better employee engagement, and especially in a remote working environment. And overall, the right culture where people really want to stay and stick with your organization. At the same time, the shortage of next generation skills, the talent demand supply gap is causing a lot of issues in talent quality. What is more important? Is speed more important? Is the quality of hiring more important? How do I assess those people? How do I judge that at such a high speed? And then combined with all of this is the lack of integrated demand supply planning. Right, the world is changing at a very rapid rate. Business requirements are changing. Business demand is growing too fast. How do you really plan for it? Can you say today what will be your talent requirement 3 months or 6 months down the line? If you can, that's great. You can really plan for that. Hiring, plan for that recruitment. But if you are doing it pretty last moment, the recruitment in such a market becomes even more difficult. So those were the top 5 issues that we found out as we were talking to various enterprises and sort of as part of our surveys. Now, if you get into the details of each of these and some of the topics that Anil mentioned. So if you move to the next slide, I think one key point Anil mentioned was contingent workforce is becoming more important than ever before. And that's absolutely true, right? Based on our survey with a large number of global enterprises, now 71% of them expect the percentage of contingent workforce within their entire workforce to increase in the next 12 to 18 months. It's already much higher than it was pre-pandemic, and that's expected to increase further. And this is, again, across the entire value chain, right? Not just the low-end skills, but some of the really high-end niche skills around, the tech roles, a lot in the healthcare, all of these are expected to move more on the contingent or gig economy side of it. And at the same time, Anil alluded to it, we expect HR, in fact, HR expects themselves to play a much bigger role. So this is an interesting conundrum, right? Globally, there's a bit of a difference in terms of who manages contingent workforce. In Europe, we have seen HR to often play a big role, but in the US, traditionally, it has been procurement which has been leading it. And now we see HR leaders playing a bigger role, which helps in better overall workforce management, better planning, and ultimately in today's world, you cannot really see permanent and contingent talent as two different silos. And then if you move to the sort of next page, the next issue that that Anil touched upon is in the diversity, equity, and inclusion. Of course, that has become a top priority for organizations and HR leaders. Our surveys clearly say that 95% of organizations want to improve their employee diversity, but one key question that organizations are still trying to answer is, what type of diversity do I need to focus on? Diversity itself is very diverse. There are various types of these diversities that an organization can focus on based on what is their current state, based on where they want to move, based on the geographies they are located, and based on their sort of personal preferences and interests. So naturally, the three areas where we see the most focus on are on sort of racial diversity, gender diversity, and people with disabilities. But we also see increasing importance and focus being given on something like neurodiversity, LGBTQI, and of course veterans as well. Anil, you have worked a lot on the sort of hybrid and work from home model. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think as I mentioned before, and we can move to the next page. We are very likely to end up with a hybrid working model, which has elements and components of work from home in addition to an office setup. As you can see on the next page, this is being validated through some of the research that we're doing. So most organizations believe that there will be a good degree of work from home, or at least a good proportion of employees working from home with considerable frequency. Now, as you can see on the right-hand side of this page, many of the organizations are actually making meaningful progress in dealing with the particular circumstances and operational challenges that hybrid workforce or hybrid working models rather bring about. But keep in mind that the work from home construct is not merely a change in location, but it has broader implications on teams, collaboration, and so on. And we can see that as we move to the next slide. Some of these challenges today are better understood because we have been dealing with them as organizations over a fairly extended period of time, since we all moved to a work from home kind of environment. Having said that, I would say that a hybrid environment actually brings about more complexity, because what it does essentially is it divides the organization into various employee groups. So those who work predominantly from home, those who work predominantly from office, and maybe those who intermittently work from home and office and so on, right? So there's a whole spectrum. Now, in that kind of a scenario, it becomes even harder to maintain consistent employee experience and engagement. We've seen several reports on how productivity has improved because of work from home, but keep in mind that a lot of this is very, very new territory, meaning we are still dealing with a lot of unknowns here. Since during the pandemic, there was definite pressure on employees to ensure that they don't appear to be slacking off and hence retain their jobs. But once we get on the other side of this situation, and with the demand supply equation as it is now, we don't know how this behavior will change, if at all. Sustaining organizational culture is also another extremely critical aspect. It also feeds into the overall employee experience, and doing that over remote environments, building the feeling of camaraderie or belonging, and driving towards a common vision and mission with shared values. All that takes effort, and in the past, a lot of it has actually come through in-person, group and individual interactions as well. But with the hybrid working model, how is this going to work, right? And how is it going to pan out? This is something that we need to really think through deeply and enable suitably as well.
So Neil, let me jump in here for a second. So we've seen the, when we first did the work from home, was kind of out of necessity. Government said close down offices kind of all at one time all over the world, and we went through a lot of hoops to make that happen. But as the recovery has happened and the reopenings have happened, first of all, it's happening unevenly around the world. So one global policy by a company doesn't work. We've seen that. I mean, different timings on this stuff. But we've also seen that pushback by employees, and they said, hey, we've kind of seen this other world. It actually works for us. And when CEOs have tried to make this happen, they've gotten a lot of pushback. And I think that's going to be the defining moment here. And you said it earlier. I don't think the story is completely been told here. It's gonna take a few more chapters, I think, before we get to the end of that.
Absolutely. So at some point in time, we'll get to find where that balance is, right? But it's going to be somewhere in between, because obviously, employees have had that taste of flexibility, and once you have that kind of convenience also being added to your life, you wouldn't necessarily want to go back all the way, right? So it's going to settle somewhere in between. There will be pushback on, let's say, mandatory office hours 100% of the time, and employers will actually do well to accommodate that, right?
Yeah.
Based on their whole go forward plan and so on.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll just quickly go through some of the other challenges that we see here. So well-being is something which is, increasingly gaining a lot of attention. Part of this is also to do with working from home, right? So, there are new challenges there, because work often blends into life and vice versa. If there's a, if this physical location is the same for both activities. And then finally, you have certain other challenges such as information security. Now, data is still a key priority for a lot of enterprises. So, how do we end up on the same baseline, whether it be work from home or otherwise, is a critical aspect. And then challenges with team building and collaboration. Very often there are operational challenges with hiring and onboarding as well. So if we move to the next slide, we can see that, so many of the challenges I mentioned, of course, affect or are intertwined with employee experience. And we cannot, state this enough. The importance of employee experience is increasing dramatically, right? Now, it is also reflected in the way that organizations are thinking about their sourcing imperatives. So whether they go for, let's say, outsourcing or even for technology-centric interventions, employee experience and improving employee experience is a key driver. You can see this reflected in our research. You can perceive that over the years, the employee experience, the importance of employee experience has really dramatically risen. Now, there are a couple of others as well, insights and analytics, access to better technology, but often these two contribute to the whole process of developing a better employee experience. Now, the other point I want to call out is, in designing the entire experience, it's not just a matter of getting a piece of technology or a few initiatives in place. It needs to be approached in a more holistic manner. It involves aspects of organization culture and how processes are designed. And very often, the design of these processes would then center around employee movements that matter, as opposed to designing around organizational silos. Next slide, please.
All right, so let's move into the impact on the people strategies, and we'll move quickly right to the next slide. And some of these we've already covered off, so I'm not going to spend any time on the hybrid approach on the next slide there, the contingent workforce and the diversity aspects. I will want to reemphasize the HR design with that employee experience. And I think that's one thing that as we think about work processes and we think about HR processes, employees have really come to expect a lot of things in their home environment with automation and where companies have really designed things to improve the home life. We need to make sure we're thinking about improving those same experiences at the workplace. So in addition to that is the way that HR thinks of itself will continue to evolve here. And outsourcing could be one of those levers. So let's talk about that a little bit more and get into the multi-pronged strategy that we want to drive deeper into.
All right. So as Michael also mentioned, the hybrid work from home situation, addressing that is a fairly complex task. There are various aspects to it, and each one of these needs to be thought through carefully. So one of the key initial things which you kind of need to think about is what proportion of workforce you expect to work from home. That itself may be a kind of a moving target, right? Now, for those who spend substantial time working from home, there needs to be a slightly different approach to things like management. Now, how do you ensure that work gets done with minimal friction? In the case of a hybrid team, management styles will have to evolve accordingly, and so will the team culture. Often what we find is a hybrid workforce may actually need to err on the side of over communication to overcome some of the natural barriers to teamwork because of lack of proximity. Some of this can be facilitated through digital and technology-based interventions, but fundamentally there needs to be a shift in the mindset as well. Other aspects such as organizational culture, I briefly touched upon. Similarly, well-being as well, in addition to things like setting limits and boundaries around work, various other initiatives such as voluntary counseling, fitness drives, including, rewards for walkathons and so on. These are some of the initiatives that we have seen as a result of, having a large portion of the workforce working from home. With that, we can move to the next slide.
Yeah, so we wanted to talk about our workforce strategy model, and we take a different view of this, and I think many different organizations do, in terms of broadening the conversation around workforce strategy. So it's really about marrying the talent acquisition and creating that integrated talent strategy here. So what we're doing is let me actually start with number 2. So the whole people strategy, the traditional acquire, activate, retain, absolutely critically important. We think those things will continue to be an important part of the dimensions, but what we're trying to do here is add on 2 different areas here. So really the talent strategy that really looks at that demand supply, and especially like in an area like IT, where it's not just a matter of can I hire IT people. There are now thousands of different skill sets that we're tracking. So it's no longer about hiring a network programmer or a compute programmer or a distributed computer asset. You got to hire people that have very specialized skills and that have very specific contextual to an industry. The sourcing model becomes extremely important. So it's not just an employee or an outside contractor. Location now becomes extremely important in the conversation. So we saw a lot of conversations through the pandemic about locations, skills taxonomy, understanding what the skills and how they're today and how they're projected to change in the future. All of those things we believe are extremely important that need to be combined with your people strategy. And then also looked in the context of the work itself. So how do you look at the work itself and drive toward better analytics and try to drive to productivity using technology that's available here? If you think about the productivity and continuous improvement, if you can make the existing workforce 10% more productive through a variety of factors that we'd like to talk about, that helps the whole talent acquisition strategy and mitigates a lot of the challenges that people are having with being able not to find talent. So if you can make them 10% more improvement, you can grow your business 10% on the same number of headcount. So that's a lot of things to consider there. But we think if you're not looking at all three of these elements, you're not approaching the problem with an optimal solution. All right, so let's look at some more numbers, Arco.
Yeah, good point, Michael. And one key element of that integrated people and talent strategy is looking at the entire talent as one, right? You can't really have different or discrete strategies for everyone. And that is where aligning contingent and permanent talent strategies becomes very important. So the pandemic really made organizations realize how important contingent workforce is, and even more critically, how important it is to manage them right. But unfortunately, we see that very few organizations today actually have a contingent strategy well integrated within the organization. But the good thing is almost everyone has realized this importance and are taking steps in that regard. And I think one interesting proof point around that is the record number of organizations who are switching their MSPs or managed service providers and trying to put a better program in place. The second or another thing that Michael mentioned was the location piece of it. While it does introduce a lot of different complexities, there is one good thing that it has introduced, which is it seems to be improving the ability to hire more or different types of talent. So talent has moved away or is moving away from those centralized hubs, and organizations which are widening their net, casting their net wide, are likely to do better in terms of hiring, improving their hiring quality and hiring timelines. So that was one sort of two important solutions. Now, if we move to the next page, we had touched upon the DE&I and how that is one of the top focus areas for organizations. But what we see is, within D&I, it's a pretty complex concept, and it varies significantly from one organization to another organization, what they are actually trying to do in D&I. So some of the top areas are, in general, organizations want to have focused HR policies around that, or change their organizational structures to support D&I. We also see a lot of focus on specialized hiring initiatives, tracking the numbers or analytics around that, as well as D&I and sensitivity training for people within the organization, because ultimately these people are responsible and consequential to how diverse the organization becomes. But the exact strategies are still pretty diverse and different from organization to organization. Still a nascent area which everyone is trying to wrap their arms around. So if we move to the sort of next slide, what we see here is most organizations, so 60% of organizations that we spoke to, they actually want outside help or are looking for outside help to improve their DE&I outcomes. Some of the most common areas where we see that is around DE&I training for the hiring managers and the recruiters, because that is one of the critical sort of filtration points which can sort of make or break your DE&I objectives. The other very important thing that we are seeing is DEI advisory and consulting. Essentially trying to understand where do I sit vis-a-vis peers? Am I better? Am I worse? What do I need to do? So trying to get external help to formulate the overall DE&I strategy. Next slide.
All right, so we briefly touched upon employee experience before. What I really want to call out in this page is that it's not a single point intervention. That it needs to come to the fore during different aspects of the employee life cycle, and particularly in critical moments that matter during the life cycle. So one instance can be onboarding. It's typically where new employee gets exposure to the organization culture, So, particular care must be taken around those points to, design that organization experience around, in the case of onboarding, building comfort for new employees rather than just creating as something to check off, right, for a new employee. Apart from process design, other elements such as culture, the environment, both physical and social aspects of the work environment and technology play a major role. Now, one of the things that enterprises must guard against here is thinking of employee experience as solely a technology intervention. We've seen this happen as part of digital projects, and often what it leads to is a pile of systems that ends up making the experience much worse than it was actually previously. Having said that, technology can still be a powerful lever when used in the correct manner. And we can see that on the next slide. So when used well, these technology and components of technology and systems can function as seamless platforms that, while abstracting away complexity from the end user, they deliver results quickly while navigating organization complexity and data silos in the underlying layers. Essentially, the technology strategy and data strategy needs to be looked at in unison, and systems need to be designed to talk to each other. And finally, you have the experience layer on top, which abstracts away the complexity from the end user. Next slide.
Hey, Neil, hold on a second there. So Neil, you talk about a pile of systems. I like that that terminology. I think that's a real danger for folks to get trapped into. Another point you have on here, you have something about the AI layer, and you've got it actually as a vertical context here. I know you spend another one of your hats you wear is on our focusing on AI. How does that play into all these pile of systems?
All right, so AI is in many ways, it's very broad, right? So we are seeing AI being used within standalone tools. We are seeing AI being embedded within other systems as well. Now it can have multiple components and effects to it. So think about it in terms of either automation, providing better insights, providing better experience. It's pretty much a very versatile tool which can be applied across the so-called pile of systems. So by the way, this slide doesn't depict it as a pile of systems. This is supposed to be more integrated and thought through in that sense. But yeah, to your point on the pile of systems, I think very often it happens when different technology interventions just happen in silos, right?
Yeah. I think the whole idea with AI is it's becoming universal. I mean, everybody's doing AI. It's not that AI is something you bolt on. It is not another system you layer on. It is something that you build that intelligence across the spectrum, and hopefully you're getting the it actually, if it's done right, it can be an additive process. If it's done wrong, it can actually be a negative.
Absolutely. And in fact, if we go to the next slide, we can see some of these use cases, right? So like I said, the AI and automation tools can play a critical role, right? Not just for employee experience, but improving efficiency, reducing the cost base of operations, and also building organizational resilience for that matter. So we have multiple examples listed here, but there are many more. So for instance, think about payroll and anomaly detection for payroll. So you have, having systems that can automatically actually sift through all that data and figure out where the anomalies are. And that can really eliminate the need for any kind of manual audit to catch these. Similarly, there's a whole gamut of interventions on the talent side as well. You can have chatbots for better candidate experience, AI-based solutions for resume parsing, and so on. And each one of these actually tend to automate the tedious aspects of people's jobs or improve experience or provide better insights. Next slide, please. All right, so this is where it kind of comes all together, right? Ultimately, all of this should be focused on business outcomes. themes such as employee experience and automation are not mere pie in the sky kind of concepts. They have consequential business impact. Right? So HR really needs to work backwards from those measurable outcomes and weave in all those themes while using various key levers to build and design the organization to deliver these results. So these levers are things like talent mix, right? You can have a proportion contingent workforce. You can have proportion with permanent employees. How do you want to leverage that? That's something you need to think through as well. Location strategy. Apart from the offshoring and nearshoring equation, you also have work from home situations now. And then finally, you have process innovation and operating model, which would also encompass the technology strategy. Now, all of these are, in and of themselves, they are fairly complicated in the sense that it's not always possible to be on top of every new innovation or technology which is coming to the market. So one of the great ways of actually ensuring that you can do all of this is through outsourcing. Since service providers, it's their core job, and with their volume and scale, they can actually exercise these levers to a greater extent. And we'll see that in the subsequent slides. Next slide, please.
All right, so let's talk about the, Kara, let's go on to the next slide. Let's talk about the role of outsourcing here. I think as we look at all the challenges and the issues and the impact on people strategies, I know Anil and Arko focus in on the outsourcing segment. So let's drop into that a little bit more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Michael and Anil, for introducing outsourcing. So, HR outsourcing is not a new concept, right? It's a pretty mature concept. But the two interesting pieces here are, one, HR outsourcing is not sort of one segment. Depending on what part of the HR hire to retire value chain you're talking about, you'll have a different set of providers with a different set of capabilities and your own different considerations. And the maturity across all these segments also very significant. For example, if you look at the sort of green dot over here, the numbers really speak for themselves. Half of the world's global workforce payroll is actually processed by payroll outsourcing providers. Quarter of the world's global workforce is managed through multi-process HR outsourcing arrangements, and so is their benefits. And more than 90% of the world's temporary workers are sourced through staffing suppliers, right? Then if we move to the middle one, some of the other things like, or other segments of the market, like recruitment process outsourcing or MSPs or VMSs, even learning and training, in most cases, probably quarter of the world's workforce, 20% of the world's workforce are being managed through these outsourcing models. And then last but not the least, we see some new segments emerging where outsourcing really helps. So something like global or multi-country payroll, which is essentially having one payroll provider for all your countries across the globe, or at least most of your countries, rather than individual single country arrangements, or something like rewards and recognition to improve the employee experience. So with that, we'll sort of get into what are some of these outsourcing markets. And Anil, if you can start off with MPHRO in the next page.
Yeah, so one of the key markets that we track is MPHRO, and Arko referred to this as multiprocess HR outsourcing. So essentially, this is any HR outsourcing construct where you have 3 or more HR processes which are outsourced to a single vendor. So think of most large HR outsourcing deals. They would typically fall into this category. Now, the interesting thing is that in the past, this largely revolved around administrative processes, often a lift and shift. But today we are seeing these being embedded within transformational constructs, right? And often you have more judgment intensive activities being addressed as well. At Everest Group, we use our proprietary framework called the Peak Matrix to comprehensively evaluate various vendors in this space and several others as well. And typically we do this on an annual basis. Now, of course, some of the commentary accompanying the reports also speak to the detailed solution and portfolio characteristics of various players, the various segments that they operate in, and the overall competitive landscape. Next slide, please.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say on that previous slide there, I started tracking the HR BPO or multi-process human resource outsourcing back about 20 years ago when I was when it was just taking off, and almost none of the names are the same. So there's just one or two names that are on the list right now. So here's what we'd like to do. We'd like to offer you, if you're a buyer of services, so if you're an enterprise and you want to get deeper into one of the other segments, so get a peak matrix on recruitment process outsourcing or our view of contingent workforce management, vendor management, any of these segments you see on there, click the box there on the quick poll, and Anil and Arco can set up some time with you to walk through what we're seeing in that particular segment. So I see a couple of people looking and interested in contingent workforce management. Several are actually. If you're interested in any of those segments, let me know or let us know by clicking the button, and we'll be in touch in the next week or so to get you a briefing on that particular segment. All right, with that, let's move into a drill down. And I believe, Anil, you're going to take us through just some of those segments in a kind of a drill down methodology. And you got 4 on a page here, so you're not going to be going through the detail, but just give people an orientation to what you guys cover.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Michael, you mentioned that 20 years ago, when you started tracking the HR BPO space, I bet, some of these constructs were probably not even around, right? So, for example, you have, rewards and recognition, right? Maybe it was there in some shape or form, but not really as a well-defined market. The point being here that, you have several different kinds of markets. Some of these are very specialized markets. So again, rewards and recognition being a good example. You don't see a lot of the typical outsourcing giants in that market. So it's critical to understand where you have best of breed players, how you can leverage that expertise to find point solutions for your needs, while potentially still orchestrating the entire solution either internally or even under a multi-process HR outsourcing construct. And we'll see some more of these as we move to the next page.
So, we were talking about all the outsourcing markets focused on the permanent workforce. So if we move to the contingent workforce, the situation is not too different. Again, there are multiple different markets over here. So on the technology side, you have the vendor management services. I'm sure most of you have heard of some of the names like Beeline or Fieldglass, which are giants over here. But then there are a lot of new vendors which have come up over there with great solutions recently. Then, of course, we have the typical staffing vendors, which are employed by most companies to rather hire their contingent workforce. Then we have the 2 interesting pieces around the CWM, contingent workforce management market, or MSP, and closely related to that is the services procurement or statement of work management. So between these 2, you will find a lot of common names, but still, capabilities vary widely. Especially services procurement or SOW is a more nascent area, and a good MSP need not necessarily mean that they are great in managing services procurement or statement of work.
So Arco, looking at this kind of from a 30,000-foot level here, I think there's a couple observations that I'd make. One is there are an incredible amount of dots on there. So I want to thank you, your team, for all the diligence of going in and interviewing and doing the data, the qualitative and the quantitative work around just doing how do you put one of these things together? I know the effort there. But give me a sense of the fragmentation, why fragmentation is a good thing and it's also a potentially bad thing.
So if I look at the the picture is different across all of these. So if I look at the VMS, the Beeline and Fieldglass are super dominant players. They have been legacy players there for quite some time. But some of the smaller players are rapidly making their mark, and to me that's a good, really good outcome for the industry, because 2 players is too low. So innovation is being pushed by having more players out there. On the staffing side, it's very different, right? Every organization works with a large number of staffing firms. There's this entire panel of staffing firms, and sort of requisitions go out to all of them to ensure that you are getting the right, sort of talent at the right time. And literally, there are probably around 10,000 staffing providers in the US, right? So that's good. On the MSP and services procurement side, it's not like a huge concentration. There are, of course, some of these leading players, but we see innovation and interesting things being brought forward by most of the players out there in the PEAK matrix. And then there's also geographical variations. Some of them are strong globally, but some of them are just focused on a few regions. So again, net, it's not just the leaders are the best. It all depends upon your individual requirements, your specifications to help you select the right provider out there.
Yeah, and I think that's an important part of the equation. It's not just you shouldn't just look at the upper right. I mean, you should know what the upper right are doing, but they may not be the best answer for you. So we encourage you to look at the entirety of the analysis. So all right, with that, let's go to some of the question and answers we've got coming in here. Let's start with a real simple one here. It says talent is somewhat available, but more than before are not willing to move or leave their current job. So let me just take a quick answer to that one. Yes, I think in the US, there has been this whole debate around, is it better to be paid to sit on the couch or not go to work than it is to work? And I think, that debate, we can't answer that one, but I think, that will be resolved pretty shortly. I think over the next few months and quarters, that one will be resolved. But the next question that goes with that is, what skill sets are we seeing a gap in demand supply? And I'd say right now, it's across the board. So I think we lost a lot of workers in this whole process. I don't think there's any areas where there's so much supply that prices are going down or salaries are going down. I think it's the exact opposite. I think it's across the board. There was a lot of supply disruption there. But you guys want to jump in on that in terms of skill sets that are, is there anything that's out there where there's an excess supply?
Yeah, Michael, sure. So while currently the situation is bad for everyone, I believe that some of this will improve for some of the lower end skills, but on the higher end of the spectrum for the tech skills, some names that come to my mind are say Microsoft Cognitive Services or say Salesforce, Einstein. These sort of skills is probably only worsen the talent demand supply gap. And then the other big piece is the entire healthcare and life sciences. Clinical roles in healthcare, some of the R&D roles in life sciences. These are only likely to get even worse from here onwards.
One of the observations that I've made from being through not the level of question mark that we're going through right now, or the challenge we're going through right now, but in the past, India Inc., so the country of India and all the business there have done an excellent job of scaling up with the talent and in skills in a relatively quick period of time. So in a period of quarters and years, not months, but quarters and years, to be able to scale up and meet the challenge of delivering scale talent. Do you think we'll see that again this time, or do you think there's anything that's going to prevent that? And what I'm referring to there, because they can bring on lots and lots of people into the pool, back up the school buses, drop off a lot of talent, that keeps the pressure on the low end of the wages from being too far out of control.
Yeah, I think Michael, you're absolutely spot on. My belief is the formidable talent hiring engine in India will continue to solve problems on the lower end of the skills. But the higher end of the skills, the tech skills, I think India is not too different from the entire globe. That will continue to be their challenge. In fact, there are some skills out there where the total demand out there in the market is simply much more than what the supply is out there. I mean, not everyone who's asking for that skill will ultimately be able to fill that role. So some of those roles are out there, right? So those, it doesn't depend whether it's India or US or Europe. It's only sort of going to get worse unless I think we have enough sort of upskilling, reskilling programs that enterprises are undertaking, that some of these talent acquisition and learning providers are undertaking.
Yeah, we did a webinar a few weeks ago on IT specialists and also talked about some of the engineering services. And in both those cases, there were in the engineering services, there was a gap of about 1 million people that were in demand and not able to be found, if you will. And there's no easy solution to that. So that takes multiple years to skill up those people. So I don't know if that'll be solved.
Yeah, so I'll just add, throwing my hat into the ring, right? So and come from a technology vendor perspective. So the point is that the skill gap is becoming so evident that technology vendors are also trying to actually address some of it through technology, right? So some vendors are actually trying to build systems which are low code, no code, and so on, which can enable maybe even business resources without specialized skill sets to actually transfer over to those kind of jobs, right? Having said that, we're still at the very early stages of that. But the point remains that this skill gap is something which everyone is cognizant of, and they're trying to approach it from different directions to get to a solution.
So if you kind of think these two different trends at the high end and the low end, if the low end, if it can bring a lot of talent on board in India, that implies a bigger move, another wave of offshoring potentially. And at the high end, it just means go back and steal from your neighbors, make bigger offers and get from your neighbors talent pool. All right, and if we all do that, then we're going to run out of money, I think. All right, so wanted to thank. There's a few more questions here that Anil and Arko. Hopefully, you can get those offline. I wanted to end this with a point to our other resources that are available online. So that you guys, I know you do a lot of blogging and content. If you want to point to those, the next slide. Yeah, so there's a lot of conversations that we're having around the HR talent and the outsourcing, how all those things come together. And then also just access to the plethora of research pieces that are also pointed to here. So I wanted to thank everybody for their participation. Anil and Arko, love your expertise, love the drill downs. And I know you guys have so much more. When you show a 1 page on a peak, I know there's another 50 or 100 pages behind that. So if you're interested in going deeper with these two guys, feel free to drop us a line, and they can have the debate of every one of those vendors on those peak matrices or much more. So thank you for your time.